This podcast is produced by Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency. The Collective Us, an NMCAA podcast, focuses on inspiring you through stories of those we've helped through our programming or by linking local resources to community members in need. Join us as we learn about the programs offered through NMCAA and how we touch people's lives every day. Welcome back to The Collective Us. I'm Erica Austin.
And I'm Ryan Buck, and we're your hosts, as a reminder. Thanks for joining us.
Ryan, we've mentioned today's topic several times over the course of our show, and I'm so excited to finally be doing a show to help the collective get a more in-depth look at the Community Needs Assessment, or CNA, because, you know, we like our acronyms around here.
It feels like it's been a while since we've addressed an acronym, so I'm glad we're doing it. You are right. We have talked about this a little bit here and there, but today, to help us dig into the whole thing, from the process to the results, we have two guests with us.
Yes, we want to welcome back to our show Kerry Baughman, NMCAA's Executive Director. Welcome.
Well, thanks for inviting me back again.
Of course.
I must have done okay the first couple times that you said, all right, we'll have her come back.
And had to suffer through a live performance as a reminder. So that's cool.
All good. Yes. Good to be here.
And we have a first-timer to the show, Jeff Schilling, Principal Consultant at Schilling Consulting. Welcome.
Oh, very great pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, welcome to the studio. Before we jump in, Kerry, can you just remind the collective in a brief 1 to 2 sentences what a community needs assessment is, just at a basic overview level?
Sure. The CNA is a process and it's a document, and it's something that we do every 3 years. And it's a collection of primary data. We're looking at data sets that have been collected by the U.S. Census Bureau and others. We're looking at assessments that have been done by our partners in the community. Certainly, there's value and a lot of work that has been done already that we are able to leverage and you look at and use. And then we look at the qualitative data and we ask our community partners and we ask our staff and board members and we ask our clients and people in the community, you know, what are you experiencing? What barriers are you encountering? And how can we help?
That was well stated. And I'm going to do a little wordplay with you because you said assessing and assessment. Mm-hmm. The CNA essentially is a reassessment of the needs of the community every 3 years, as you said. Why is it important specifically to do this every 3 years?
Well, we do it officially every 3 years, but we look at the data and we update the data on an ongoing basis. And it's important because we need to know that we are putting the dollars where they need to go, that we're doing the work that needs to be done, and we're doing it in the way that it needs to be done in order to have the biggest impact. So we're looking at the results of the assessment, and we're looking at what we're doing, and we're looking at whether we're moving the mark on things that we've been targeting, and we adjust. So it's a constant learning process, and this is one of the key tools that we use that informs who we are as an organization and what we decide to do year to year.
So I'm assuming after 3 years, things might pop up, things maybe that weren't at the top 3 years prior. I'm assuming maybe around the time of the pandemic, things had popped up that weren't higher needs pre-COVID. So is that true? Do things move that frequently every 3 years? Are you finding things popping that didn't before?
Yeah. In general, you know, there's certain themes that you kind of expect, and then the data supports it. But certainly, you know, with the impact of the pandemic just 3+ years ago, you know, how that changed the landscape. And then now, as a lot of the supports have fallen away, as we're moving back into a space where, you know, we're looking at the impact overall, we do see shifts, and we see some significant shifts, and we see nuances too about, for instance, when we looked at food insecurity this year, there were nuances attached to the responses that indicated that there were needs around food security that were different than we expected and different than we'd seen before.
Do you attribute anything to that specifically, if you can comment off the cuff?
Yeah, well, in the case of food security, the responses that we got really said we feel pretty confident about our ability to access food, but what we want is more fruits and vegetables. And what the parents that we surveyed said, we want more information too. We want to know more about what is a healthy diet and how can we access the things that are required? And so that was really interesting because before we spent a lot of effort that was needed to make sure that people, had food, and we were working in coalition and in partnership in the community because that was a huge concern. And it's not that it's not a concern anymore. It's just that now we can think about it a little bit differently, and we can seek out different grants or bring different resources to the table to address what people have told us they're interested in.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
We know the collective does, and myself included, we're visual learners, a lot of us. So can you put us into the place of what the process looks like this time around? Put us in the office or the yard with you. And how long does it take to complete one of these typically?
Yeah, I'll kick it off and give an overview, and then I'll pass it on to Jeff to really talk about the meat because we were so fortunate to have Jeff leading the process for us. It typically takes up to a year. So we started back in April. And we just approved the community needs assessment at our board meeting in November. So it takes the better part of a year. And so it is an ongoing process with a timeline and lots of components to keep track of. So again, very fortunate. We were on the ground to do some of the work that was needed to access those that we serve and to distribute surveys. But the overall sort of meta design of the process was all Jeff. So I'm going to let him talk about what that looked like.
Oh, thanks. Well, community action agencies are following a model that a lot of other organizations are following, which is to have data-driven improvement. And so it's a cycle, just like Kerry was describing. It begins with collecting up-to-date information about community needs, and they change over time. They do evolve as a result of all kinds of things, influences, like you said, Erica, like COVID, but other things as well. The amount of information that just the general public is exposed to sometimes influences their thinking about needs. Kerry was talking about the interest in fresh fruits and vegetables. That's partly driven by there's a lot more information out there today about a healthy diet and how important it is to your overall health, your ability to sleep well. People just are learning about this secondhand, and it's starting to influence what they express to you as a need. The process then really starts with where can we get data? And there's two principal sources. We start with what's called secondary data from other sources like the Census Bureau, the Alliance to End Homelessness, the United Way, all kinds of organizations. And the good news is, because so many organizations are starting to focus on community needs, the data is getting better and better. Wouldn't you agree, Kerry? It's getting richer.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
And access to it?
Access to it
That's
is
great.
much more accessible at multiple levels. It wasn't that many years ago when the best I could get was data at a state level. Then pretty soon county level was available. And we even used township level data on poverty to really take a much closer, deep dive look at each of the counties that are served by this agency. So it starts with that kind of data. Where can we get data from existing sources? And then usually based on what we learned there, we want to dig deeper. We want to drill down a little bit further. And we use surveys, focus groups, interviews with stakeholders to do that, because we can ask them questions about the data that we found. Does this ring true to you? Do you think there's some underlying causes we need to explore? That kind of primary research that's originated by the agency really adds a lot of depth of understanding to what we know.
Yeah. And the fact that you are working with NMCAA, are you finding that those candid responses are coming a little easier, the way you're presenting those in focus groups and things like that, and everybody's understanding what everybody wants in the process?
I do, especially when we do focus groups with just members of the community or people that have been served by the agency. People are very willing to do that. It used to be that we had to offer something in return to get people to kind of come and participate. Nowadays, people want to talk about their health care. They want to talk about the services that they need. They'll show up.
So you do not have to give away toasters and or vacations to the Bahamas anymore. It's a desire to want to participate and want to be in that community.
And have their input. But the other side of it is then, if I'm going to give you my input, what are you going to do with it? And that's the other part of a community needs assessment, is to start to link the information that we gathered to an action plan and kind of be transparent with the community.
Yeah.
Here's what we heard. here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We had a really great focus group this year with our neighborhood meeting. So it's something that we do monthly, and we invite the neighbors to come to our office and let us know like what they're interested in and bring resources and speakers. And so we used that existing group to do a focus group just to understand, I think the specific topic was the ALICE population and how do we keep people who are asset limited, income constrained, employed from falling into poverty, because we know that that's a growing number, and we know if our mission is to address poverty, that's certainly part of what we're here to do. And so, it was a couple hours of really, really rich conversation, really rich feedback. And, we're thinking about, so how do we go back to that group again, share where we are, share what we heard, and then ultimately share how their voice impacted our programs and services.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It feels very real.
Yeah.
And that's what people want.
Yeah.
It feels that way.
Yeah. Two things from your comment just now, Kerry. First, you said ALICE, and then you said it out loud, but can you just reiterate what that acronym is one more time?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So it's asset limited, income constrained, employed. So it's people who are working really, really hard and still not able to meet basic needs. Mm-hmm. So you'll see in our community needs assessment that over the last couple years, our poverty rates overall in the 10 counties have declined. Not significantly, but there has been a trend of decline over time. But ALICE rates, the group of people that are still struggling to make it day to day, has increased. And so when you add those two numbers together, in some of our counties, that's almost 50% of the population that are struggling to meet basic needs.
Wow. That's
quite staggering.
Yeah, for sure.
To hear it in those terms. It's math and kind of plain. And then, Jeff, you come in and allow the rubber to meet the road and get the whys and the hows from the people who are experiencing these things. And to get a little more granular, who are the people completing the survey to provide us with this information?
Clients that have been helped by the Community Action Agency. So they keep records and we can issue a survey to them. We could call them if we wanted to, but we also check with stakeholders, community leaders in each of the counties that are served. Sometimes they're heading up another organization that's working on some of the same problems.
Oh, wow.
So it's an opportunity to talk to them about, well, what are you seeing as the big barriers for transportation, for example, or getting access to healthy food? And we can compare that to what we've heard and what we've learned from our own people that we've helped. And sometimes a big aha is what
That's
comes out of
and
that.
thank you for, we've talked about food a lot, but again, you mentioned transportation. This is a very broad spectrum.
I just want to go back one thing. So we were talking about the people who complete the surveys for the information, but also, Kerry, you had mentioned the neighborhood meeting. I don't know that we've ever mentioned the neighborhood meeting on this podcast. So, can you just briefly tell us what that is and who's invited to that?
Sure. It's something that we've been doing, I think, for 20 years, and we're doing it at our Traverse City office. And if you go on our website, you'll see the calendar of events, and anyone is welcome to come. And like I said, it really is just a gathering of neighbors, people that are interested in learning more about how to move towards self-sufficiency, how to access services, what's available. And so we invite anyone to come. We have a meal together, and then we bring speakers or folks to the meeting to share information
different
or
topics, like
different
each month
topics.
and-
Because we really want to be responsive to what people want, and so their voice is directing exactly what these look like month to month and week to week. So
thank you for sharing
Is it
that.
really called the neighborhood meeting?
Yes.
It's called the neighborhood meeting.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And again, as Jeff was talking, it's another way for people to be heard. And then the website is showing you these results, for people who want that tangible feedback. And there's always ways to engage even further from what you see on the website. That's really impressive.
And just as a side note, the document that we're going to start jumping into here in just a moment is the community needs assessment. And we are going to be having that on our website. I believe we're going to put it under the About section under annual reporting. I think that's a good place for it. So you could probably find it there.
And we should pause to allow them to do that.
And follow along.
Because we're going to reference some specific areas of the document. And if our guests don't mind to jump into some key findings, because we've touched on and highlighted some areas of discussion, and why not get into some more details? It appears the highest needs in the chart on the bottom of page 4. The top tier priorities include housing and homelessness at number 1, early education and childcare at number 2, and we've talked about this, food insecurity at number 3. Can you speak to each of those briefly and tell us how you came to those rankings and conclusions?
Well, housing and homelessness is particularly interesting in northern Michigan. As you both know, this is a growing area, and it means there's a big demand for housing, but there's many people moving to the area that do have means. And so what's being built in a lot of cases is housing that's oriented towards the needs of those people moving to the community. That sort of leaves out the people that are really struggling, the ALICE population, the people in poverty, the homeless. Even finding temporary shelter can be a huge challenge. So there's a problem with this growth, right? We're not able to help everyone that lives in the northern Michigan area with their housing needs. And so now we're having to play catch up. What's a good plan to do that? How can we work with resources like Housing North to come up with a better plan so that we can make sure that housing's available for everybody that needs it, regardless of their income level?
Well, when you're looking at these, again, I personally think it's wonderful that you have this objectivity, although you're very clearly, us in the room here, a part of this team. And that's what is really inspiring about NMCAA and their partnership and the way that they bring in cool people to the circle. But how free in your ideas do you feel? Like, we're talking about agility. Are you at the point where solutions, where is your pendulum as far as solution offerings?
I think we're on the precipice, personally, of a very fascinating and amazing time. And it was sort of born out of COVID, oddly enough. I had a chance to interview a lot of stakeholders in community needs assessments during that period. And most of the organizations wanted me to ask a question about COVID. Was there any silver lining, anything good that came out of COVID? And to a person, everyone that I interviewed said, yes, there is one, the innovation. I was forced to get into a room with people that I didn't see or meet with very often and find solutions to problems that were life-threatening problems. And I missed that because we did come up with solutions. We came up with new ways to do things that now we don't even want to go back to the way we used to do them. So it created this hunger for collaboration, wouldn't you agree, Kerry, and innovation. And I think that's carried forward. But now the question is, how do we keep those people meeting and innovating?
Yeah, and I think with all of the social issues that we're looking at, there's so much complexity. And so this really helps us dive into the complexity. We're looking at a housing shortage, we're looking at aging housing stock, and we're hearing from our clients in the survey and from the focus groups that, there are aspects to the housing issue that are really important and we can bring light to. One of those, for instance, is down payment assistance. Most of our clients in the survey that had issues finding a home, of course, finding an affordable home was about number 1. But number 2 was down payment assistance. How do I get into a home? And then promoting the services that we have for down payment assistance and then expanding them. That's something that we're looking at right now. We knew this was an important piece. We've got more data to support it. And we're looking at how can we increase our support through down payment assistance for all homeowners and first-time homeowners. The other thing that is really interesting too, and I don't know that we've seen this at this level before, but when we surveyed our clients, again, making your home more energy efficient and home repairs were really important to them and a big need. And so we're looking at this data, knowing that this is part of the larger housing solution. And then we're also looking at some of the demographic data that we've received and looking at like the over 70 population, and how does that interact with home repairs? What kinds of home repairs? How do we keep people in their homes for longer because there are not a lot of alternatives for people to move into in the area that we live in. So it's the data, and then it's the layering of the data. And then like Jeff said earlier, we have the ability then to look geographically at county levels, in smaller areas, census tracts, and townships. Yeah. And then we can see, where is a concentration of, say, older housing stock, older population, where we really want to, target and focus our efforts to make the biggest impact.
Wow. That sounds like, in short, a really great way to be efficient, save time, and do the work where it needs to be done and bring tools and solutions that are real. But it feels very tangible. The way that the document's laid out and the way you're talking about this, I feel, because I've said it before, it's well known, Laura, on the show, I'm a dummy. I feel very in the conversation about this. So anybody we talk about data a lot, and it's very impressive and I think very tangible that you use data to make this happen for people. But don't feel overwhelmed by looking at this because we're saying data and all this. I feel it's very digestible and easy to understand.
Yeah, I agree.
And if I could add, what I'm really excited about, and I know we'll be talking about sort of next steps with this, but I'm really excited about diving into pieces of this, moving forward and holding more focus groups and gathering some additional data to say, okay, we're seeing this. What does this mean? So this is a large and comprehensive document. Like you say, I think it's digestible and there's so much to look at. But I think, following this, we'll be providing more data and more information at targeted areas of what you see in the results to do a deeper dive. And, of course, we'll share those out as well.
Yeah.
Related to that, too, we were talking earlier about how coming out of COVID, there was this high interest in collaboration. There's these tremendous partnership opportunities right now because everybody's starting to focus on some of the same problems. What I mean by that is we talk about social determinants of poverty, employment and education, housing and homelessness, early education and childcare, food insecurity, health, transportation needs. Well, those are the same things, actually, that healthcare organizations are focusing on in their needs assessment.
Interesting.
And other social service organizations are also focusing on the same problems. So again, we're coming out of COVID. People saw how collaboration worked. It led to innovation, and everybody's starting to focus on the same things. So I agree with Kerry. I think the timing is right to put some of these problems in front of a group and collaborate and work together.
It's interesting when you can present them in those ways, like we have the same challenges.
Yeah.
Let's pool resources when it makes sense, energies.
Yeah. So it kind of goes along with my next question I have written.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
So referencing that same chart that is at the bottom of page 4, in the second tier priorities, we have financial or money management. Number 2 is coordination of services, and 3, availability of services. So those last 2 are a little bit different compared to the first 4. Can you give us a little insight into those? What does that look like and how did those come up?
Yeah, some of that came out from the stakeholder interviews because we could talk with them about some of the social determinants I mentioned earlier, but what they also wanted to talk about are some of the systematic problems that are getting in the way of helping people. And 2 of them, coordination of services and the availability of services. Availability being a big word nowadays because Are you talking virtual, physical? Are you talking about bringing the service to the person or bringing the person to the service? I mean, availability has a lot of possible implications. But absolutely, second tier, but not unimportant. If we're going to address any of these social determinants, it's going to have to be through working on the coordination of services and availability of services as well.
And I think that speaks to the current collaboration that's going on. Some of it coming out of COVID, too, is this recognition that these are really big issues that we all have to come around and work together on and create larger systems to support delivering and having an impact. And so one of the biggest barriers that we hear is, I don't know where to go. I have this issue. I don't know where to go. How do we make it easy for people just to know where to start and then have our organization and others like us in the background in a coordinated way being able to support? Because sometimes it's just hard enough to reach out and ask for the help. The additional barriers decrease our ability to be effective. And so it's on us to figure out how to make it clear and easy for folks to access and to know where to find services.
This kind of leads into your next question in a way, but you said, I'm interested in the minutia of defining the different means of availability. Does that have to do with our area? If we were, we're not a big urban center. So is that specific, that kind of thing to us, this region?
I think it's true across the board. I think we have things that are unique about that in living in a rural area. We did a 180 to virtual for so many of our services when we had to. And now our task is to continue to figure out what's the best combination of service provision. What did we learn? What do we keep providing? What do we do differently? And so, Jeff said something about going to the client. How can we do more of that? I just, for me, I think that's really an important question. It's not always the most convenient. It's not always the simplest to do, but how do we bring services to individuals who need them? And I think about our tax program. We're coming up on tax season.
Yeah.
And, a little promo there, if you free taxes. But, thinking about the number of taxes that we do, we're shooting for like 5,000 tax returns this year. We can't expect people just to come to us. We have to figure out, how do we have virtual options? How do we go to settings where groups of people can access us? We work closely with a lot of the Commission on Aging centers in our 10-county region. Where else can we be for access?
Right.
And part of access, too, for me, I think, is maintaining a physical presence in a community. We really want to make sure that we're a part of a community, and we're continuing to ask the question about how do we have more of a physical presence in the 10 counties that we serve. I think we do a pretty good job. We've got satellite offices. We've got a number of main offices. We've got classrooms. But, sometimes you just want to go to your local main street and walk in and see a person, and a person you might know, or maybe, you're related to, whatever the case may be. I mean, those connections are important in service delivery because it's all relationship. And so how do we continue to, bring services to the people?
Yeah.
It begs an interesting question, and maybe not another topic to throw at you, but similar to availability, what does presence look like? Because the Main Street thing is everybody's default, but there may be other ways that presence, NMCAA's presence, is needed or wanted, whether it's a brick and mortar-ish or it's something that's more fluid, like a pop-up type of mentality, things like that.
Exactly.
But just presence, what does that look like to people?
Yeah, co-locating with other like organizations in the community. I mean, that's something that we do, and we're continuing to look for more opportunities. I think that's where we can do that, where we can be partnered together. I think that's, that pop-up sort of idea, and how do we bring
big topic in the 50th anniversary. It just keeps going.
Mobile, mobile buses.
This is called money where mouth is, I think.
Well, being marketing manager, I'm really into knowing about demographics. And on page 14, we have some general demographics. Jeff, can you identify who the general demographic is in our region and why it's important to identify them when we complete a CNA?
By general demographics, we mean taking a comprehensive look at demographics from just the overall population. Is it stable? Is it growing? But what's also the age structure? What's the racial diversity level? And one of the things we learned is it's different depending on the county that you're looking at, both age structure and racial differences, as well as, and this was a little bit of a surprise, I think, but I'm starting to see this in other counties across the state. When you dig deeper than the county level, down to the township level, poverty rates and ALICE rates don't always match up. You'll find townships where the poverty rate is very high, but the ALICE rate is not. So it starts to create some insight about how best can we serve the people in that township. Are they struggling with poverty, or are they struggling with some of the social determinants that put them at risk for falling into poverty? That leads you to two different types of solutions. So age structure, racial structure, income structure, education structure, all of that relates to how we look at demographics.
Interesting. And I think there was one part, I don't know if it's in this section or if it was another section, but there was an interesting line in there that I saw was the majority of the surveys that were completed were done by millennial or maybe.
Oh,
did you see that part?
No, but
but
you
it
comment?
doesn't. But it's not proportionate to the general demographic. Is that correct?
Right.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah. Are you finding younger people are more apt to get into surveying?
It might be a reflection of who you serve, right, Kerry?
Right.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a number of probably the respondents were the parents of our Head Start and Early Head Start families. And so, that may have skewed a little bit.
Yeah.
But we do know, looking at the demographics, when we look at poverty rates and ALICE rates, it's the older cohort and then the 25 and younger that have the highest needs.
Yeah.
So we may be reaching out and connecting to those groups because of that reason as well.
And that survey individual may have dependents in their life and other things like that.
This is another good way of understanding how secondary data and primary data can work together. So you might remember one of our primary data techniques was to have a focus group with the neighborhood group. And we focused on the topic of ALICE with them. what we learned from them is they also see Alice as two large populations, the younger adults and the oldest adults. And what was also really interesting is how they differentiate the needs between those two populations. The younger adults are looking for things like, well, they might be first-time home buyers. So how do I get advice about what's involved with buying a home? I've never had to do that before. Or managing my budget, or getting access to resources to get more education so I can get a job that pays better. Whereas the older adult population focused on different things, access to food, helping manage the resources that I already have, making the best of my retirement income. Two different groups among the Alice population with two different sets of needs.
And how is that challenging on the ground?
Well, I think I just found that fascinating to be able to look at that demographic and you see sort of, what might look like a very similar scenario. But then when you can get some more information about that, and then you see there are really distinct differences. So there's a need that exists, but how to meet the need is going to look really different with those two age groups. So I think knowing that and being able to act on that and say, okay, so if this is a need with the 25 and under group, accessibility and availability, where do we find them? What do we bring to them? And the same with the older population.
Right.
So that level of information, I think, is where the true value of the process lies.
Yeah.
The 25 and under group might be well served with any kind of help and resource that you can bring to them through the internet. Whereas the older population might be a little still reluctant. They might be looking more for that in-person, face-to-face type of help. The good news with that younger population is, and sometimes we find good news when we're doing our community needs assessment, is broadband access is improving steadily throughout your area.
Good.
That is good.
And I asked a question about our region earlier because not trying to pat on the back too much, but we do have, I think, some unique challenges in access challenges that, you say that to, friends of mine back in Chicago, they're like, what? People without access to internet that are close to an area like ours is just hard for some people to grasp. So it does bear repeating. But Kerry, I see this kind of lightness when you talked about discovering something new, a pattern, and Jeff as well. So key observations from the top 3 priorities. I'm going to ask you, Kerry, homelessness and housing. This is information that can be found on page 36. So we just talked previously about some surprises, some key findings previously, and that presents the opportunity. Okay, this is a unique thing. So homelessness and housing, page 36. Kerry, can you tell us what in this portion of the CNA pops out? And this is a big topic, so not any pressure, and it doesn't have to be a big wow, but just pops out.
Yeah, some of the things we see, high cost burden, the lack of availability, are things that aren't a surprise, and they pop up certainly as high needs. But there were other components about, looking at which counties have the oldest homes, knowing where the housing stock is aging so we can access it. And the counties in the 10-county region that we serve with the oldest homes is Charlevoix. So that was really interesting. If I wouldn't have a guess necessarily which that would be, and then to find out, okay, it's Charlevoix. So what does that mean in our service provision? And we even have most plumbing and kitchen problems. So access to water in the home and the 2 counties that are being impacted the most. And so we have services that we can bring to support that. So just that kind of information is really interesting. And then the other piece was we saw a lot of increase in the number of homeless students.
And what do you and student could mean essentially any age, right? But do you mean
like through the K-12 school system?
There you go.
Unfortunately, yeah.
That's more real.
Yeah. And so, that was an interesting statistic too to look at and see where we're seeing an increase in homeless numbers and speculate why that might be. So some of the places, for instance, where we saw some of the biggest housing shortages, we also saw an increase in the number of homeless students. How are they connected? Asking those questions.
Can you share why aging, for a novice, why aging homes are a good data point? Potentially, you said that maybe as a positive.
Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily a positive, but it's the information is a positive because we can help. I think that's where the lightness comes
great.
from.
Thank you. I was kind of like, okay, I wasn't putting them together.
No,
That's totally
thank
on
you
me.
for
For
asking
me,
that.
as marketing manager, I'm sitting here going, I probably need to dig into this data a little bit more so I can more effectively target as I'm placing ads, and hoping to reach those people who need our services.
Yeah.
I didn't put those together
for,
too. So.
those types of, whatever service it might be. Oh, Charlevoix, okay, we got to focus on that county. So I might have to dig into this a little bit more.
Right.
Thank you for that, Kerry, because I personally just felt like I wasn't connecting the two, and now that makes tons of sense.
Yeah, no, thanks for
And it's even more noble,
clarifying.
everybody. Are you hearing that?
Yeah. Well, it helps us advocate too, when we know
Absolutely.
what the needs are this way, because we always want to advocate for Northern Michigan when we're asking funders at the state level, when we're, trying to get dollars into Northern Michigan, to be able to be very specific about what our needs are is so important. So we don't, fall into the big blanket of Southeast Michigan or the entire state. To be very specific about, we have some different needs, to your point earlier about access and availability. And so this helps us articulate those so we can secure the funding that we need. So I wasn't necessarily excited about, I like old homes, but it was really our ability to know, where to be effective. But
you were just excited because you could help more people.
Yes.
That's what it was. And that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard.
So jumping to page 41 in the assessment, there's key findings.
One of your favorite topics.
Yes, it is one of my favorite topics. I've come to learn. Early education and childcare. We've had a variety of episodes on this show, which is why Ryan knows that this is one of my favorites. Regarding these topics, I find it very interesting every time we bring up the need for childcare. What are some of the key things that pop out to you in this section regarding the need for childcare in our area?
Another low-key topic, right?
Either of you can
we
jump
keep hitting
in.
them with really, really heady stuff.
I think this is a great example of how you really have to take a close look at the social determinants, including the childcare, when you're looking at the ALICE population and how vulnerable their situation is. And where this comes to light for me is when you consider the cost of childcare. One of the things we looked at, Ryan, you'd mentioned earlier, demographics. Well, we look at income levels by county. So we know what the average income level is. We also know what the average cost of childcare is. So we can do the math there, and we can find out kind of disturbing things like in Roscommon County, for the average household, 36% of the budget has to go for childcare. Can you imagine? 36% of your budget going, yeah, right? So
wow.
I laugh because it's sad.
That's
it
way
is.
over the that's over the recommended percentage for a balanced
And
budget.
childcare
By a
costs,
lot.
I think that there's two sides of it. There's a super challenging side to it, which is it's very expensive. And yet childcare workers, some would argue, are very underpaid. So how do we solve that economic problem where the cost to give something to people that they need is going to have to increase at some point if we're going to pay people appropriately, but it's already straining the household budget. The flip side is maybe some other trends will start to kick in that will help. And one of the things that I've started to see around the country, and I think even a little bit around Northern Michigan, is more and more employers getting back into the mindset that I've got to help employees with childcare costs.
Because employees and retention of them is really important.
Right on the button, Ryan.
Absolutely.
You nailed it. Right now, we're in the midst of a workforce shortage that some people estimate will go on for another generation. So kind of fasten your seatbelts there. But I think that's sinking in with employers. And to have an ability to attract a workforce and retain them, they're probably going to have to take a new look at their benefit structure. And if childcare is at the top of a lot of those candidates' lists, hey, we've got to do something. We either have to have a center of our own or we're going to have to subsidize childcare.
Right. And a smart employer could look at a website like NMCAA's website and help themselves out by looking at data that you have already provided.
Maybe become a collaborative center of
Or
some kind.
I wasn't saying, but just saying.
Yeah, and interestingly, and not surprisingly, our survey data bore that out too. When we asked what is the biggest barrier to work, there was a whole list of options: transportation, physical disability, lack of a degree, etc., and lack of childcare was the biggest barrier.
Yeah.
The biggest?
The biggest barrier to work. The other interesting question that's kind of connected was, what are the biggest barriers to receiving help? And no childcare was the biggest barrier to receiving help. So thinking about what that means, the process of getting assistance and getting the help you need, and having childcare be a barrier for that too, to even go to the next step, which would, might be finding a job. So
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, absolutely. The reality of that would be
your newborn
devastating.
twins and your 2 under 5 trying to
trying to
navigate systems and
somebody
services.
to help just take my kids for a minute so that I can go fill out this job or go to this job interview. Like I
Too
can't.
soon.
Like,
freak out. It's not happening. It's
No,
not
I know. I'm just, I can totally relate. That would be, really devastating.
If you step back and think about the logistics of that and what you just said about those two problems intertwined and hurting and harming each other, that's an interesting bit of perspective on that. And these are our kids. These are our little people.
Exactly.
They're very vulnerable and they're special to us, and it's not like something to be pawned off. And I think some people, they're like, oh, well, this is the best I got. I hope for the best. And you're trying to do better for our community. That's cool.
Yeah. And there's conversations all through our community, and all at the state level, recognizing, I think a lot of this, again, goes back to the challenges faced during COVID, that this is paramount in the addressing the social issues, and there's an understanding of how critical it is now that wasn't there before. So we're positioned with our partners in these discussions at, I think, like you said earlier, Jeff, like this is an opportune time now. Now, what can we do with this? We know this. We've got some, systems issues that we're addressing. We're working in collaboration. How do we really move the needle on making sure that all of our kids are taken care of?
No childcare being the number one barrier. This kind of goes back to what we started our whole conversation around too, which is, do community needs change over time? In 2024, with your clients, it's the number one barrier. In 2021, it was number 4. So it's moved from number 4 to number 1 in 3 years.
That's
and Erica,
surprising.
I think you'll be interested in this. Back in 2021, not knowing where to find help was number 2. Thanks to your good work, it's down to number 4.
How about that?
Pretty
Is
awesome.
marketing effective? Is it quantifiable? That's pretty good.
That's
That's
good
a
to
solid
hear. That is
number.
good to hear. Yeah.
We organically talked about this last topic at the beginning, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But food insecurity is on page 43. And it's another issue that it's evolving. Kerry kind of talked about that a little. There's more knowledge, but it's not an issue that's going away, right? You talked about, nobody said we're getting there. Those are a lot of the top, getting close to a solution. We've got it licked. So again, similarly, are there any key items or items of interest that stand out in this report on page 43? Because we talked about some unique things about more awareness, right, of a healthy diet. Cost, just in the zeitgeist, right? Everybody talks about it's cheaper to go to McDonald's than a salad, but maybe not so much anymore. Is that real? Is that true? Is cost something that comes up in a healthy lifestyle in any of this reporting? Like, I just can't afford organic kale. I can't afford it.
It definitely came up in the neighborhood focus group, cost of food and groceries, and that's a sensitive point in the whole concept of inflation and how we've been battling that the last few years.
Okay, so coming from a place like Chicago, you had Whole Foods, which is it had its nose up at everybody who couldn't afford Whole Foods, like myself. I didn't necessarily, but it felt like that was a club and everybody was healthy and I wasn't able to.
Right.
Or felt like I had to put on a suit before I went in. So is that something, does it come up in that context, that there's just no access to it, or that, I just can't afford a daily routine of healthy food?
Well, I think, we know that the costs of processed foods are often cheaper, they're often more affordable, and that's something that we have addressed in some of the information that we provide. But I think part of that is providing opportunities for bringing fruits and vegetables, which is what has been asked by the parents that we interviewed and by our clients.
Specifically, you mean fruits and vegetables?
Specifically, fruits and vegetables. And we live in such a great area to be able to do farm to table and to be able to access fresh fruits and vegetables. There's so many great groups that are working that. The Northwest Food Coalition working so hard to make that happen and bring fresh fruits and vegetables to pantries. So how can we help? We're a part of the Northwest Food Coalition as the fiduciary, and we work really closely in providing supports for that system. But more is needed. And I think we have opportunities that we haven't uncovered yet to do that. So I think there's components related to providing access easier to families for those very things, those fruits and vegetables and the farm to table, and also to provide, they've asked for information, what do I do? What are some options? How do you prepare this? So there's some educational components to it as well. And I think the other thing that stood out for me in the data, looking at our client survey, there are costs associated with not having year-round childcare and school options. And that came out really strongly.
Yeah.
During the summer, all of a sudden, your budget is impacted because if you've got, and you're nodding, Erica. Yep. Yeah. Your food costs probably skyrocket. And that's something to think about, in our care provision when we're setting up programs. Not only does a year-round system or summertime option support parents who are working, but it also impacts their budget.
I wouldn't call it a small thing, but that is a large point to make.
Yeah, I know there are.
About the seasonality of your costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
With children.
Yeah, I know my sister definitely deals with that, having all her kids are in school. But I know the school my son goes to provides like a, pick up your weekly lunch for any kid under the age of 18, which is great. But yeah, that absolutely could be something that would be a little bit of a barrier, is having that budget increase in the summertime, as well as the childcare costs if your kiddos are too young to stay home alone during the summer.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, we did another focus group with early Head Start parents. And we asked them, again, what are some of the biggest barriers? What are some of the biggest challenges? But we also talked to them specifically about what's their level of interest in summer programs, or also help with early education and childcare in the off hours, because increasingly you've got families where the parent or both parents are working during the day shift. So, or they're working in the night shift, so they need childcare at night. It was interesting how much they talked about, well, if you're going to do a good summer program and make it available, you've got to have food.
Right.
You've got to take that into consideration. What are you going to feed them? Is it healthy? If you're going to provide childcare as a resource so that I can go to my second shift job, what about dinner? Can you help me there? So they're tying the two together very much.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'm going to ask you to pardon my interruption because it's time to call out milestone career achievements. In January, we are celebrating with Kelly Adams with 10 years, and Tiffany Bright has 5 years with NMCAA. Thank you both for all of the hard work you do and everything you do to support your community and neighbors.
That's amazing. My favorite segment.
So now moving into the qualitative data sources, let's jump to page 91.
And we've talked about the neighborhood meeting a few times. We've got some real juice here.
Yes. So what's some of the data points? We've talked about this actually quite a bit already this show, but what are some of the key things that you'd like to share that you found from that data source?
One of the things I thought was interesting is how quickly they identified a whole number of the different social determinants. Because remember, this focus group was oriented on ALICE, those at risk of falling into poverty. We asked them, what are some warning signs that someone is about to fall into poverty? Listen to what they said: money management issues, major medical event and its related costs, losing a job or a change in employment, a natural disaster, a tornado or a blizzard, loss of home or no insurance on the home. These are all things that make them so vulnerable. It just takes one. And if two of these happen, now all of a sudden they're not Alice anymore. They're in poverty.
Yeah, we talked about all of these things, and that's assuming that you stay healthy,
right?
That the weather keeps cooperating, all the other variables that life throws, and to know that, again, NMCAA has something for you in a customized manner. I harp on that a lot, but all of this is a deeper demonstration of how NMCAA and its partners take care of the individual, the family, in a very unique way. And this is all of your data and armament to do that. It's amazing.
And I'll say this group gave us some really interesting data on specific age cohorts, like what their thoughts were. So with the under 25, Jeff mentioned like first-time home buyer education, childcare, finding employment, and money management and budgeting. And for the 65 plus, education on new technology use, which makes sense.
That's an interesting one.
I can
Open to
relate to some of that. How to assist with childcare. A lot of grandparents are providing care for their grandchildren.
Yeah.
Access to legal advice. And then, finding care providers who accept Medicare and Medicaid, navigating the healthcare system in that way. And then they identified some things that they thought would be important to both age groups. And that included avoiding scams, again, budget and financial counseling, cable service cost, and relocation assistance and moving costs. So, some things that we hadn't even really touched on in other parts for us to consider as a help to keep people from falling into poverty.
That's really
It
interesting.
maybe bears doing another show discussing what you don't do, and then you'd probably figure out a way to do that as well.
Well, the thing, we don't do everything, that's for sure. But this really helps us okay, this is a need for a population that we serve. So we make sure that we know who does it and, who does it in our community. Because that's part of what we do. It isn't always that we have something that can meet a need, but we are connecting people to the community to get the support that they need. And so this helps us do a better job of that.
Well, Kerry, now that we've gone through a bunch of this data and put this community needs assessment together, how do we move forward? What does this mean for changes in programming? Are we shifting focus on higher priority needs? What do the next steps look like?
Yeah, like I said before, this is just a critical process and a critical thing that we do every 3 years to inform who we are. So it's not something that, thank you, Jeff. That was a great 8 months. And now we're going to post it on our website. Now is when the work really begins. And so we are planning over the next year, how are we going to dive into this data? And so we have a process in place that we're going to start in 2025 where each of our departments is going to be looking at this data in depth. And we're going to be doing focus groups. And our early childhood program is going to be really interested in the early childhood data, but there's also going to give us important insight into other components of what we're seeing in the results. And then we're going to continue to do those focus groups. We're going to bring them together at the agency level. We're going to invite partners, and we're going to do a deep dive into some of the focus areas, and then continue to just try to, hit those targeted areas that are continually popping up and learn more about it, and then, adjust accordingly. Are we providing a service that's addressing this? Is there something else we can do? Or is there a partner that we want to make sure that we're connecting with and we're connecting our clients to? So we've got, in the next 10 months, we've got a rollout plan for the community and a rollout plan internally to really actually start the work that this is designed to support.
That's awesome. I'm so interested to see how this all kind of plays out. So I'm happy to be along for the ride.
Yeah. And and we'll be, like I said earlier, we'll be sharing as we do and we learn more. We'll continue to share that out too, because, our partners in the community do the same thing and we all support each other. And there's some great work being done out there and we want to be able to support our Northwest region of Michigan.
Yeah. Awesome.
There's going to be a few marketing exercises that come out of this. One or two, do you think?
Probably a couple.
Project-based. Well, the time has come. I think Kerry knows this. And Jeff, you've heard the program before, so we end on some, like you thought it was tough up to this point, food insecurity and homelessness. Now we have the real hard-hitting questions. And Kerry, I don't know if we've ever asked you this question.
Either. Oh, is this a new one?
Well, not really. It's a classic, but
Okay.
You could do this, and we like to put this out in the universe. But thinking about marketing, we're thinking about needs. We're thinking about unlimited opportunities to message what everybody needs. So if you can choose one spokesperson for NMCAA for your use,
yes,
who would it be?
So you
did.
You can pick yourself if you'd like.
No,
you're a great one.
This was.
Did we ask you this?
You did, and I'm gonna use the same answer. I'm gonna recycle my answer because it hasn't changed.
Okay.
And that answer is, somebody who's utilized our services and been able to make a difference in their. Yeah. So I see that wasn't so hard because you've already asked it of me.
And look how consistent she is. Like that's the real human being right there.
But really, it's there's a.
You're right.
There's
though.
so many success stories, and if we want someone to represent and talk, that's the person.
Yeah.
I know. I think you were trying to get me to say Taylor Swift last time, but I didn't.
It's possible. Off mic, one day we'll have to get her real answer. You'll have to get it in the office because there's got to be one. It doesn't have to be Taylor Swift.
No, the testimonials, though, are fantastic.
Yeah.
They are.
And,
Every time.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Well, Jeff, we have a hard-hitting question for you as well. If you could tell us one key thing to remember when you're dissecting this kind of data, what would it be and why?
Look for the patterns, I guess I'd say. And I think that's what came through this time working with the agency, which is we started with all that secondary data from all those other sources. And we first said, well, where do we see patterns? Is it in certain counties? Is it in certain areas of the region? Is it for certain social determinants? And the answer to that was, yeah, there were a few social determinants that really popped out across all of this data. And there were certain counties that really popped out across all of this data. But then moving into the secondary data, now you get to start to ask questions. You need to bring people in and you share some of the data with them, but you drill a little bit deeper into some of the underlying causes and the reasons why the data is the way it is. So then we did the same thing. We basically took all of the secondary sources and those same social determinants, plus a few new ones like awareness and coordination of services, and we looked for the patterns. And by the time we had done that for both the primary and the secondary data, that's when the priority needs started to emerge pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we think data is a big mystery and has all these numbers and it's just going to give me a headache and make my eyes blurry. It doesn't need to be. You need to source the data, bring it to the table, but then look for the patterns. I guess that's, Erica, that's what I would say is the key.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Kerry and Jeff, for sharing all this great information with us today. It's so great to hear NMCAA's new focus for the next few years and how we can look forward to helping our community in the future. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. And I just want to, if I could, just thank Jeff for leading us through this process.
Absolutely.
It has been a wonderful journey, and Jeff has just embodied community action and just, come up to us and been a part of the focus groups in person on even though the weather was bad. And, he just really showed up. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I just want to thank him very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know you that well, but I could feel that you are somebody who really cares about the mission. And again, everybody who comes in here as a partner or collaborator with NMCAA, I'd be hard-pressed to not think that they were a part of the team, however that meant, which is really amazing. Cheers to you.
Yeah. Well, it is time. Ryan, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, aside from celebrating Jeff's amazing work and, again, some really great free advice on data there, I have a bit of an easy one in that there were a lot of big moments here. A big takeaway was the engagement that NMCAA is engendering in youth, to know that young people are getting the attention that they're getting, but you're getting them to engage. When thinking about how do you get young people to engage, you're doing it. And it seems to me that they are interested in their future. They're interested in what's going on. So you're enabling young people and then their elder counterparts to connect with them in a way. So it's really amazing how you're setting up our future continually.
Yeah.
And this is a huge, huge, amazing community undertaking that anybody should really take a look at to get either inspired of where your fellow citizens are in need.
Thank you for that take. All right. And just as a reminder, the document that you heard us referring to throughout this episode is available on our website, nmcaa.net, under the About section and under Annual Reporting. A couple reminders before we wrap up today. If you or someone you know is homeless, please call 1-844-900-0500. And NMCAA is still taking interest forms for child and family development programs, including Head Start and Early Head Start. Go to nmcaa.net to fill out an interest form today.
Kerry touched on this earlier, but NMCAA is currently seeking volunteers for the free tax prep program. To learn more about that, contact NMCAA by calling 231-947-3780.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please take a moment to share this episode or the show link on social media. Follow the podcast to know when a new episode drops and rate the show. It truly helps us continue to get the word out on all the good NMCAA does in the community.
If you would like to become a sustaining donor with a recurring gift or contribute a one-time donation, please check out nmcaa.net/donate or send us a message at collectiveuspodcast@nmcaa.net.
And to learn more about Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency or the programs we offer, or if you would like to make a donation, we encourage you to reach out at 231-947-3780 or visit our website, nmcaa.net. And to the collective today, we encourage you to continue to strive each day to do something to help yourself or your neighbors.